Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Silver Tempest, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, myself and Jack are going to be talking about the recently announced rotation for April the 14th, 2023. That's when this D block will be rotating out. It's actually the same weekend of the EUIC, one of the biggest tournaments of the year, as well as the date that we actually get Scarlet and Violet cards become legal for tournament play. So we get that double whammy at the EUIC, which is going to be really exciting to be a part of, where we get a whole heap of cards leaving, a whole heap of cards being introduced for the first time. So really looking forward to that. Myself and Jack are going to be going over the most impactful stuff from this D block. It's actually going to come into effect on PTCG Live on the 30th of March. So that gives us a couple weeks to try and test out the format, which is really helpful for those of us going to that event. And also there is a quick note on Expanded, where there is no change happening to that format for anyone who is still interested in Expanded. But we're going to turn our attentions to Standard today and look at all these D block cards, how they are leaving the format and how they're affecting the current decks in the game.
Yeah, so we've managed to sort of compile a list of basically every card that's been playable, not just currently playable, but been playable over the past few years since we first had Sword and Shield introduced. So feel free to pause for a look at everything that we think is massively impactful. I'll point out a couple of noteworthy ones. I think the biggest one, Pokemon-wise, is actually going to be the Inteleon engine. Obviously, that only sort of came to fruition with Chilling Reign and the Rapid Strike Sobble that came out. But ever since, it's been a mainstay in so many decks. It's been basically meta warping, and it was even still being used in earlier than that Chilling Reign set that came out. So yeah, Inteleon I think is realistically probably the biggest thing that's rotating this year. It started to die down a little bit, but Palkia and some of these other water decks, as well as some other one prize decks, still use it massively. So it may not be quite as popular as it was once, but still a pretty big deal. Guru is another one that's just had sort of fritterings of play all over the place ever since it's been in the format. I think it's probably at its most popular right now, realistically, with the past couple of formats. It's had Kyurem, it's had Lost Box, it's had Lugia. So Guru is definitely going to be one that's missed. Galarian Zigzagoon is another one that's just a really nice damage fixer that's been useful throughout its time in the format. Amazing Rare, Yveltal is probably the other big one that's very notable right now, just because it's such a mainstay in Lugia builds. It's just a free take some prize cards. So Lugia is really going to have to change. And then I think Snorlax is another really notable one as well. Some supporters, I think Birdkeeper and Marnie are definitely the biggest ones. Birdkeeper is just a really, really nice supporter to have. I'm really sad to see this one go. It's a supporter that I would love to become sort of evergreen, to be honest, just a really, really useful one. And Marnie, I don't think anyone's sad to see the back of Marnie, to be honest. It's not been well received. It took about 2 weeks of it being printed back in 2020 for people to realize how terrible this card was. But unfortunately, it's been a massive part of the game. So yeah, not too sad to see the back of that one go. Air Balloon and Big Charm are the two biggest ones from the tool category. I think Big Parasol has seen some play more recently as well. But I think Big Charm and Air Balloon are the big hits. There's not too many VMAXs right now that are being played. I think the most recent one that's seen success was actually Eternatus, which did well in a Japanese tournament very recently. But the majority of these VMAXs are just sort of legacy content these days. Worth noting, though, a couple of Vs. I think Eldegoss is probably the biggest one, along with Crobat, that are currently still seeing play. Zacian here and there. Vikavolt sort of on the cusp of seeing play with Regieleki at the moment, but yeah, there's a few more there. We lose a huge array of special energy. Aurora and Capture and Twin, I think, are being the biggest, but also things like Powerful Colorless, Speed Energy, Wash Energy. Basically, all of the types of energy have all seen play, I think, bar basically the grass one. All of them have seen some kind of competitive play at some point. So yeah, that's going to be a big hit. I think, like I say, though, Twin, Capture, and Aurora are the biggest. Items wise, we lose Quick Ball and Evo Incense. We have seen that we've got a sort of Quick Ball replacement in a Nest Ball reprint, but still going to be pretty sad to see that one go. Same with Evo Incense. Just nice to have these good search cards. The other big one is Scoop Up Net. There's obviously a few others around there as well. But I think Scoop Up Net, again, another absolutely insane card, so broken and has just never been bad. So again, probably not one people are too upset to see the back of, as well as Ordinary Rod and Palpad. That's another notable one. Palpad we sort of have in Team Yell's Cheer, and Ordinary Rod we have in Clara, but we would much prefer item versions of these cards. And finally, stadiums-wise, all of these stadiums have seen play, but I think by far the biggest is Training Court. Training Court, again, another card I would love to just have as an evergreen card. It's just a really, really nice card to have for the game. So, yeah, pretty sad to see that one go. But yeah, feel free to pause here for just a bit of an update on everything else. But those are the most notable ones, in our opinion, at least.
So let's now talk about the survivors of post-rotation. There are a few that are completely wiped off the face of the map, we feel. Obviously, the Quad Wheezing deck will be one of these. We no longer have the Wheezing, so that's an obvious one. The Reggie deck probably isn't going to be successful with essentially all of its special energy going. It had Aurora, so it could use all of its Reggies in the first place. It had Twin Energy to be able to use the Regigigas, giving it, game into VMAX decks, especially Mew. And it's also lost Speed Lightning for its use with Regieleki, and of course Capture, just for getting your stuff into play in the first place. For such a specific sort of category that you have to, the hoops you have to jump through to try and get those Reggies into play, means that it's just so much more difficult to get it going in the first place, and you're now only accelerating like basic energy, which is just so not worth it. So even though we have the Reggies, we're really in the waiting for some new special energy to be reintroduced for this deck to ever see the light of day again. You can see there's some highlighted in yellow here to try and just say that these are still kind of around. They're still possible, but they are taking huge hits as well. So these are the decks we're going to be jumping into in greater detail momentarily.
So yeah, Scarlet and Violet, the last thing that we're going to quickly talk about. Just we've had some inklings of what's going to be reprinted and what's going to be coming out over the next or in that big sort of first Scarlet and Violet set, which is where we're going to have the where we're sort of having this rotation alongside. We haven't got all of the information yet, so we're just having to pick and choose a couple of things. But the biggest one is that Nestball reprint that I mentioned. So it's always kind of that worrying question at the start of a rotation: is how much ball search do we lose? Do we end up sort of having to play really, really awkward counts of ball search cards? Luckily, we're keeping Ultra Ball, and it's having a reprint in this set, as well as having a Nestball reprint. So luckily, it's not looking too bad. Hopefully, we'll maybe get one more sort of not quite as good as Nestball or Ultra Ball, but something else as well, just to supplement maybe the Evo Incense loss. But in general, I'm pretty happy with that. And the other big one I think is worth noting is I can't remember the exact name of the stadium, but this new stadium is essentially a Skyo City reprint, which reduces the basic or the retreat cost of your basic Pokemon by 1. I think that's the other big, most notable one, because again, it's just a really nice general use card that other decks can use. There's a couple of other things on here. We've got like the Miraidon with decent searchability and some a sort of pseudo max elixir reprint as well. We've got something to kind of, I think it's Penny that kind of replaces the Scoop Up Net, not quite exactly, but it's at least some kind of replacement. Arvin for some searching, and then just you can see that we're starting to move towards a slightly different format where we're going to have more evolutions probably. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see some kind of replacement for Evo Incense, but we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, it's not as bad as some rotations have been in the past. I'm actually not too worried about the ball search of this rotation, especially compared to the days of like Timer Ball and Great Ball. We actually have some search that is guaranteed. There's no worries about it. So I'm actually pleased with. I'm also pleased that they've been decent enough to announce that we're having a Nestball reprint now, rather than speculation for a little while. No one has to panic anymore. We all know we can play the game again after rotation, which, like I say, is always the biggest question, to be honest.
Right, let's dig into the decks themselves then. And Lugia is taking a massive hit. I think this might be the most powerful we've ever seen Lugia, or will ever see Lugia, and then it's gone completely off a cliff because it can no longer abuse powerful colorless energy, which was a big part of its early turn 2 tempo, where you could be easily pressurizing or responding on V-Star Pokemon and knocking them out. You're losing Capture Energy for early game consistency and getting even tech Pokemon like Oranguru into play. Aurora energy, as well as the accompanying hiding and heat, stopping your synergy with Yveltal, which is also going. All the amazing rares go, so you're losing all of those attacking options. The Guru was great. Eldegoss and Crobat were sort of bit part players, but it's still a bit of a hit to them. And we're also losing some of the big sort of consistency and search item cards as well. The Quick Ball being an activator for ARCHEOPS in the discard pile, and Evo Incense being a search card for that, means that there are massive gaps in the Lugia deck. There's a lot less special energy you can abuse. It's essentially things like Lucky Energy, Gift Energy, V-Guard energy, and then still double turbo. These are the things that are going to have to go into ARCHEOPS Lugia decks now these days, which is really, really rough. Also, we might have to play things like Capturing Aroma as an item replacement for the likes of Incense, which is really sad. Nest Ball is far worse than Quick Ball in exactly this deck because you're essentially using Quick Ball a lot of the time just for the discard synergy. So you do lose a lot of your internal consistency. I think the deck will easily be dropping down the tier list. I don't know if it completely dies because there can still be a lot of strengths around Lugia, being a colorless Pokemon that you can share and scare up, having V-Guard searchable out of the deck, having possibly Radiant Gardevoir replacing Radiant Charizard going forward. There might still just be enough because you can't sleep on how strong that acceleration still is, but it's definitely less consistent at getting the turn 2 pop off, and it's going to be more work to get that going, and it's less payoff. So definitely taking a huge backseat, I think, in this new format.
Yeah. Next up, we have Mew VMAX, and to some people's dismay, this is going to be a little bit sad because not much. It's not actually losing that much. Quick Ball is probably the biggest one. We have a Nest Ball replacement in Nest Ball, so it's still got lots of ball search. The bigger thing is actually it being a good hand thinner, so that's kind of awkward. But again, if that's the biggest thing that Mew is losing, it's not that big of a deal. It still looks to be a pace setter. It still looks to be super consistent. It doesn't lose any of the sort of Fusion Strike package because that was all in one set. It's still got access to, a variety of different. It can still go aggressive. We lose Marnie, but there's still things like Judge and stuff if you wanted to go down that more defensive route. Still got all the things like double turbo and everything. So yeah, it more loses sort of fringe cards like the Hero's Medal and the Big Parasol. It loses some defense to things like Giratina, which we'll mention momentarily. Looks to be actually one of the bigger winners from this rotation, realistically. But yeah, it loses a couple of tools here and there, but there's nothing of like that core Mew engine that really goes anywhere, which means, especially in the first probably month or so of this rotation, it's likely to be one of the more consistent decks, and therefore probably one of the pace setters, like I say, and one of the most consistent, a deck that's going to be providing consistent results because it doesn't lose anything about its draw engine. It's still going to be drawing more cards. That's basically the selling point of Mew these days, is the amount of cards it can draw. And that doesn't change at all. So especially just for those first few weeks of the rotation, I would expect a big impact from Mew. Even if it doesn't quite last, I still think Mew looks to be one of the strongest decks going forward, just because, nothing really changes other than Quick Ball, to be honest.
Onto those lost engines that Jack touched on, and it looks like we're losing a ton of pieces here. We lose some really important basics and a lot of Mirage Gate synergy cards with the amazing rares and even Zekrom as of late. Lose a couple of bit part supporters like Marnie and Birdkeeper, which you would sometimes see as like a 1 or 2 count. Losing Pokegear and Palpad are also a little bit annoying. Palpad having some redundancy, allowing you to sometimes, lost zone one of your Claras or one of your Raihans or whatever, and know that you can still reactivate the one copy that you would still have. Essentially, your flower selectings get harder to do because you lose Air Balloon and Scoop Up Net, and they get more difficult throughout the game because you lose Primate Wisdom. So any freebies that you would get by wisdoming, excess VIP passes that you've drawn for turn or taken off prize cards or whatever, you can no longer wisdom them to the top to then completely trash them. So you're even weaker against things like Roxanne and Judge, other hand disruption cards that are in the game. So the deck is just a lot more of a headache to play, and I think you can get sort of messed up by your Comfey a lot more often, which is a worry. I also think Mirage Gate just in general takes a hit. Ornery Rod was a really nice enabler for the Mirage Gate, and Training Court to a lesser extent was as well, to sort of sort out these wacky energy combinations that you would have in your deck with like 3/2/2 counts or whatever of all sorts of different energy or whatnot. It's just much harder to get the value from Radiant Greninja that you often need to in the gate builds. So I do think that's also a bit of a headache. You might have to go towards the energy recyclers and stuff, and then you lose a bit of utility by having like thin Pokemon lines and whatnot. So I think a lot of this is replaceable. I think the net is clearly the standout. Everyone sees that Scoop Up Net's going and thinks that the Confe engine is completely dead. And I do think it's, much slower to get to 10. Obviously, we can't see the sort of Turbo Tord get to Sableye turn 2 anymore. I think that's just far less possible because, even though you can replace net with other switching cards, and even that new stadium is great for the Confe engine, actually, to give yourself free pivots. I think you just need to have more bench space committed to the Confes themselves, and it just slows down your board state a little bit, and it's a little bit more awkward. I do think Giratina could have a bit of a resurgence. Like I say, it doesn't really enjoy the Lugia matchup right now, so it's happy to see that taking a huge nerf. And it was actually really good into Mew when you added a Drapion tech. You have an easy route to just knocking out 2 Mew VMAX, and there's not much they can do to stop you as you sort of accumulate your combo with your Confes in the opening stages and just sort of get to 10 as quickly as possible for your V-Star power. Possibly it's harder for you to get to 10 in time against the Mew now that you don't have Scoop Up Net. That would be the only thing to try and juggle. But yeah, I think the sort of Mirage Gate takes a big hit. The Turbo just Charizard build takes a hit because you lose out on net and get to Sableye much slower. But I think, the core components are still here. Confe is still good. Really enjoy seeing that stadium. It could even be like a 4 count in the new age builds of Lost Box. And, the selling points are still there. Giratina is still huge. Mirage Gate is still a big selling point, and will continue to be so for all sorts of Pokemon coming out. So I think the engine takes a bit of a bath, but it still has those selling points that it's going to be still experimented with a lot.
Next, Palkia, and again, Palkia is another one where the engine is taking a complete hit. Obviously, there's a variety of different Palkia decks that have seen play since it was released. We've got the Inteleon builds, which obviously use Inteleon, so that's going. We've got the Kyurem builds, which massively rely on Guru. So I think realistically, Kyurem is probably back to the binder for a little while because we also lose Rotom Phone. So there's just no easy way of being able to power up that Glaciated World ability. So and that's one of the biggest selling points of the Kyurem. So I think realistically, you probably have to move back towards like a Barrel engine, as we've seen some success with in the past. Some of the ball search cards, again, a bit annoying that we're losing, but we still have things like Nest Ball and stuff. So not the biggest deal. Obviously, being a water type, it loses Capacious Bucket and Nessa, some really, really nice benefits for water types, as well as Wash Energy. But at least it still has things like Irida, so there's still great reason to be a water type. We also get back energy search, so it's not like we're completely out of ways of searching the energy as well. But because of this, like I say, we're going to have to really shift how Palkia builds are going to be built. I think, like I mentioned, Barrel is probably the only engine that realistically makes sense anymore, which is a shame because it's a bit less sort of tutory and a bit less sort of combo-y. But I think realistically, it's the only way it's going to be going forward. It's still a really, really strong card, though. Palkia is still one of the, honestly, one of the best attackers out there. It's very, very efficient. Its V-Star power is still incredibly strong. And again, it's very happy to see the format take a bit of a slower step when we naturally see things like Lugia slow down a little bit, and these Lost Zone engines that can eventually catch up and then overtake you with all of these one prizes, those go as well. So I think it's looking pretty good for Palkia. It's going to have to definitely completely adapt because, like I say, Inteleon and Kyurem both, well, Kyurem doesn't rotate, but its best mate Oranguru does. So it's kind of going to be a whole new world for Palkia, but I think it's a world that Palkia can definitely thrive on. Like I say, a slower format is exactly what Palkia wants, and realistically, I think in slower formats you really can benefit from that V-Star power so much more as well. And also, still Greninja is still going to be a great thing, especially if we're moving back towards sort of a format where there's multiple one prize Pokemon that evolve into 2 prize Pokemon. Again, forcing Manaphy's out of people and stuff, especially when the ball search is again slightly more limited and things we're going to have to be playing Ultra Balls instead of Evo Winters and stuff like that. Greninja still seems like a pretty good addition to this deck. So yeah, I still think Palkia can definitely be strong. It's, like I say, going to have to adapt, but I'm pretty sure it's a format or it's a rotation that Palkia is pretty happy with. It's happy to adapt into whatever comes next, and I think it should be good.
Onto Arceus Duraludon. Gets away pretty unscathed. I guess Incense, just for giving yourself those turn 2 outs into your Arceus V-Stars, a bit of a hit. You also lose your better Duraludon, but I don't think it's a huge issue here. You lose some of your tanking tools, which was nice, but you no longer need Parasol anyway, because you're not worried about Yveltal anymore. So you more or less come out okay. I think the issue is we may not be in a hugely special energy dominant format. We lose most of the good ones, to be honest with you, and you're no longer preying on the likes of the Reggie deck or Lugia if they are at least dropping a tier list, if not falling off the face of the metagame. So the reason to play Skyscraper may no longer be there, especially if new decks come out that are basic energy focused. So there could easily be Arceus plus other partners once again having a spring into life. Again, just like Jack was saying with Palkia, Arceus loves seeing a nerf to Lugia. Lugia was really slowing down the playability of all other V-Stars because it was just way too quick going second. And even, going first, but even going second, it could reply on a V-Star immediately, and not many other things in the game could do that. Even Giratina oftentimes took, a one-prize approach in the opening stages because it couldn't get to 7 quickly enough to respond on a V-Star immediately. So Arceus having that breathing room once again to maybe sit on the board for a turn is so big, and being allowed to two-shot other V-Stars is obviously very helpful to Arceus. So a return to the good old-fashioned big barrel engine may be in order here. Losing Quick Ball, again, is a shame for the big barrel engine because, again, you lose a hand thinner. But in general, I think that's probably going to still be okay. And once again, Arceus has all this great basic energy acceleration, so we can cherry pick what types we feel are most relevant. If we're worried about Miraidon stuff, we can find some fighting partners. We've done it in the past. If we're still worried about Lugia and Palkia, we can throw in the Pikachu, etc. So we know that Arceus can still be good at adapting when it's not completely railroaded by tempo. So losing this Lugia from the metagame as that huge threat is obviously massive. So Arceus, big thumbs up. Duraludon is kind of that question mark wait and see card because it is really a reaction to the format that it's seeing any play right now.
Next up, we have MEWTWO Control, and this is kind of also just talking about control in general because, there's plenty of different ways you can play it. The biggest losses, I think the biggest loss realistically is probably the Snorlax. Snorlax has basically been the heart and soul of Control ever since it was released back in Vivid Voltage. So it's going to be a pretty big loss because that was often the way these decks dug all the way to the bottom, or at least didn't end up sort of passing turn by turn. They were still able to accrue some resources. So that's really big. But you also lose sort of 2 big ways of basically infinitely looping. You lose Palpad, which is obviously a key piece in the Palpad, Silene, Team Yelchir. Essentially, because we lose Palpad, you don't ever really get any free Silenes anymore. If you're looking at the net average of how many times you flip heads, now that you don't get to Palpad in basically a free Silene plus a Yelchir, all of a sudden you have to essentially spend your Silenes on Yelchirs. So every 2 Silenes you put in, you get 1 free card, whereas before it was 2 or 3, which is just going to be way too slow. Even now, sometimes it's a little bit too slow. So yeah, it's just going to be way too slow realistically to survive. So we're going to have to see Palpad's one of these cards which they kind of sort of noted that it felt like a bit of a card that was going to be around forever. So it wouldn't surprise me if we still see some kind of reprint to it and somehow. But right now, yeah, there's no great way of infinitely looping supporters. Similarly with Eldegoss, we don't get to Eldegoss back our Yelchir or our Silene or whatever we want to Eldegoss again, and jump back into the deck and keep going infinite that way. So yeah, that's the biggest deal. Basically losing the race to the bottom stuff with Snorlax, as well as the ways of going infinite, which sound really big deals, and without a doubt they definitely are. But there's not actually masses of control tools that we're actually losing. It's like Yellhorn and Galamine are the only real control tools that we're losing. So we still have all of the ways of disrupting people, albeit not as many ways to recycle them. So obviously Control always finds a way, and there will be sort of ways. There will probably be new cards that are printed, and there'll be ways that we that people find to go infinite or go long enough to be able to run the opponent out of resources. But it's definitely going to have to adapt, and I think it's going to take the minds of people that are very clever to work out how that's got to be done. But because we still have all of these actual disruption tools in the like control toolkit, it's likely that there's still a place for control somewhere. It's just whether it becomes maybe more of a stalling approach where you get rid of enough energy and then still try and take 6 prizes, a bit like the latest deck from Sander and Maze that we saw in Stuttgart. It could be like we go towards decks or strategies that are like that, where you just slow the opponent down enough to try and generate a Pokemon that can then try and take 6 prizes. So yeah, it's a weird one. It's always really difficult to evaluate control, especially in a rotation format when you also have no idea what's coming out and what the format's going to look like. But it's more the engines that we're losing than the actual control tools. So if we can find an appropriate engine for those control tools, I still think there's a place for control for sure.
On to the last deck that we're going to talk about today, then, ZOROARK Toolbox. Definitely a fun one. Definitely one of these Stage 1 kits that, again, is reactionary to the meta. So it's always this sort of wait and see to know which sort of Stage 1s go into the box. But in terms of what we're actually losing, Cincino we can get away with because we already have a Curlier, basically, replacement. Losing Incense is a bit annoying because, of course, we're trying to find all of these Stage 1s to discard to be able to transform into them, so that's a bit of a headache. We lose a couple of recycling cards as well, like Ornery Rod and Palpad, which is always a little bit annoying, especially for a deck that goes through so many Zorua and Zoroark. Naturally, you want to constantly have your next one ready to go. But I think one of the bigger ones could easily be the Capture and Twin Energy. They featured heavily in some of the most recent Zoro builds that have been successful. So trying to find replacements for that is going to be pretty important. It may force us towards a basic energy approach as well. I've personally been a fan of Radiant Charizard in the Zoro box before, and having Magma Basin as a way to recycle energy can be really nice and give yourself an alternative attacker that's, you know, less reliant on double turbo energy, and obviously twin energy is going. So it sort of eases the pressure on the likes of the Breaksin, the likes of the Wormadam, these sorts of Stage 1s that have been in the toolbox before. But I think Zoroark's actually not in a bad place. It really enjoys seeing a slower Lost Box, or maybe less Lost Box. And we know that it still has a number of Stage 1s that it can react with and use quite nicely. So I'm quietly optimistic about Zorobox. I really am interested to see what other evolution search we get, if any. If it's just down to like Arizu and what was it, Jack is his name, or Jax or something, from the new set. I think it's pretty dire. But otherwise, I'm really looking forward to trying to bring Zoro into the new format. It's finally time, perhaps.
Finally, we just wanted to touch on the tool Errata because we didn't feel it was like worthy of a full video, because it's realistically not like it's a big change, but it's not worth doing a whole video on. So we just wanted to talk about it here. So you may or may not have seen that Pokemon tools are changing with the release of Scarlet and Violet, along with the borders of cards, by the way. Make sure you get excited for some silver borders. But yeah, Pokemon tools are changing from items. They're now classified as specifically Pokemon tools and no longer items. So what does that mean? That means cards like Peony and Regieleki can still get them because they're still trainer cards, but cards like Irida, Pokestop, and Mew can no longer get them because they state specifically that they search for item cards. What that means is essentially cards, they're going to be a little bit less searchable. They're going to be a little bit harder to access, but we're going to see maybe they're going to be sort of hindered less. So in the exact same way that they don't count as items anymore, something like a Vikavolt with an item locking attack wouldn't actually stop you from playing Pokemon tool cards anymore. So yeah, that's definitely worth noting. That the Arvon card that we've got on the slide is still in Japanese, but basically states that you can search for an item and a tool. So it's going to open up the possibilities in the design space for being able to have specific tool interactions, which is interesting. It could mean that because these are a little bit harder to find compared to items, maybe they print more powerful ones or more unique ones. We'll have to wait and see. But the biggest thing is basically, well, we feel the biggest thing is basically it's just making it a little bit more, a little bit less confusing how items and tools are the same thing, but they're not always the same thing or whatever. It's this way sort of just cleans everything up and makes them their own specific category. So yeah, we'll have to see where this sort of goes. It'll be interesting to see whether they actually make any changes to how strong specific tools are going forward. Based on Rock Chestplate, I'm not really expecting it, but we'll have to wait and see. This is a very specific one that we've seen an image of. But yeah, the other one that's worth noting is they're actually, just for the ease of other people or players in the format, they're actually reprinting Choice Belt as a Pokemon tool as well, which is really interesting to see. It's nice to see them hopefully making it as there'd be as little confusion as possible, because it all got a bit weird with tools and how you sort of categorize them and stuff. So yeah, really cool to see. Going to be interesting to see whether it goes anywhere or whether it's just to make things a bit easier. We'll have to wait and see. But yeah, just wanted to quickly touch on that because again, we didn't feel it was worth a full video, but definitely a noteworthy change. And that happens, I believe, well, for us, I believe as well, at the same time as Scarlet Violet's release. So that shouldn't be changing any time before. It changes in Japan when the set's released in January. So I'm assuming it's going to be the exact same here. So yeah, no need to fret immediately. You can still be searching your tools in all the current ways you can.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, that wraps up our discussion on rotation. Of course, it's still a bit of a foggy view. We don't know the impact of Crown Zenith just yet, and what decks will be looking like after that set, although it's only a small one. And we don't know the full picture for Scarlet and Violet, so there could still be some puzzle pieces that we get back in different forms. So yeah, still keep an eye out on the channel, because we will be doing a discussion closer to the time, more than likely. And there could even be some decks that we didn't talk about today that have been in the shadows, have been kept at bay by the power of Lost Box or the power of Lugia and a few other things here and there that could once again have a chance to shine. So let me know which one of those decks you're looking forward to hearing about and seeing again in the future post-rotation, because there are definitely some archetypes out there that could be big winners from this. So we'll hear it all down below. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.